Welcome to our podcast. It's just pot. What's the problem? This is part 5 of the Bryn Spejcher trial. Viewer discretion is advised. We will be talking about violent behaviors induced by cannabis. Help us raise awareness of cannabis-induced psychosis by liking this video or podcast, commenting on this video or podcast, and sharing it. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We welcome you to the Every Brain Matters podcast. It's just pot. What's the problem? I'm your host, Aubrey Adams, and director of Every Brain Matters. And we have a special guest today here. Her name is Amy. She is Bryn Spejcher's friend. We've had 2 national advocates that educate about the dangers of marijuana, especially cannabis-induced psychosis. Heidi A. Swan, thank you for joining us again today, Heidi. She is the author of A Night in Jail. And then we also have Dr. Christy Brown here joining us again. She is a retired professor, and Heidi and Christy attended the Bryn Spejcher trial and were firsthand witnesses of this trial. So we are so grateful you all are here today, and we will introduce Amy next. Amy is Bryn Spejcher's longtime friend, and she is here to give us her perspective and her opinions about what happened to her good friend when she experienced cannabis-induced psychosis and her perspective now on what's conspired. So Amy, welcome.
Thanks.
Well, Amy, can you tell us a little bit about when did you meet Bryn? How long have you been friends?
We've been friends since my senior year of high school. She was a grade younger than me, but we were in kind of like the same group of friends. We had a lot of people that kind of crossed over, and yeah, we would hang out all the time, especially that year between like high school and college, is when we got a little bit closer, and then stayed in touch through college and everything, and then both of us kind of moved away, and then we've been back in the same areas at times and all of that. So kind of, similar life things.
And can you describe what Bryn was like growing up at that time?
Yeah, I mean, like a normal kid. We were both into sports, so we were like kind of like the athletes of our group, high achieving, definitely both really wanted to get like A's. We did really well in school, thinking about college, junior, senior year, that kind of thing, where we were going to go, what we were going to do. And like, I don't know, I would say like a typical teenager, but always very fun. Always had a smile on her face, yeah, just a lot of fun to hang out with, we were always laughing.
And did she ever show any signs of any mental health condition, mental illness at the time you knew her growing up? No.
Even it took me, I knew her for 5 years before I learned that she was deaf.
Oh, really?
Even like that is not something that I like noticed or realized, like when you're in high school and stuff, and even talking with her, like never noticed like a speech impediment or anything like that. So I remember being like, okay, like what? And she's like, well, when I first met you, I told you. And I'm like, well, yeah, you probably told me then, but didn't think about it, and it never got brought up in anything. So yeah, but yeah, no like mental illnesses or anything like that. Like,
wow, that's amazing that you didn't know for 5 years that she was hearing impaired.
Yeah. Yeah, and her hair was always down, and she'd keep, and yeah, she just was a normal kid.
So you could talk to her and converse with her, and she never, did she say what a lot or anything? I mean, her hearing aids were sufficient for her. She could hear everything you were saying to her then, obviously.
Yeah, no more than anyone else, like, I feel like I say what sometimes too, you're not paying attention.
Oh yeah.
Definitely wasn't noticeable at all.
For sure. So let's fast forward to 2018 when Bryn did experience cannabis-induced psychosis, and that as a result, her behaviors were violent and unfortunately ended the life of her friend, Chad O'Melia. What were you still in contact with her in 2018?
Not directly. Within our friend group, we would do like Thanksgiving and Christmas. So I'd see her there. We'd obviously catch up, and all of that. And I heard through the grapevine, like someone just texted me and they were like, "Did you see this?" And my response was like, "Is this a joke? Like, what are you talking about? Like this is silly. Why would you send this to me?" And then when we found out it's something that like actually happened, it was pretty shocking. And my first thought was there must have been something else in there. I'll be honest, like from the start, I was like that couldn't have just been, marijuana. Um,
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
When you first got the text message about how Bryn ended a life and of her friend Chad, did you even know marijuana was involved at that time, or did you learn about that after the fact?
I think after the fact, unless it was in the news articles, because it was just like that one picture. I think it was the mugshot even. And then if the headline had said it, then yes, but if not, then I wouldn't have known. But probably after reading them, depending on, like I said, like when it was put out there. Because for a really long time, that's all I knew, was what was in the news. Kind of.
So when you were reading the news articles that said Bryn Spejcher kills Chad O'Melia over induced and had a psychotic episode induced by cannabis, you were thinking there's no way. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your thought process was what at the
there,
time
there had to have been something else. Yeah.
in the marijuana? Did you think it was laced with something, or
Yeah. Yeah. That
because
was
what were you taught about marijuana? Did you feel it was a fairly safe drug?
yes, in general, and that most of the time you get really like chill and low and you just hang out on the couch and you watch, funny movies or um anything like that. Like, and even my experience with it as well, like it's not it no one became, heightened. Everyone would be like relaxed or chill. And especially like in the media or anything like that, you don't see anything like that.
Were you under the impression, or did anybody tell you or share with you that marijuana actually helps mental illness or anxiety or depression?
No, I haven't heard much about that. I even then I believe I heard the opposite, kind of like higher highs, lower lows, kind of a thing. Where
Okay.
you know marijuana or any drug really doesn't help mental illness unless it's a specific mental illness drug, like antidepressants and those types of things.
Christy and Heidi, would you like to ask Amy any questions at this point?
Well, I'm really burning to ask her about if you attended the trial, you hadn't talked or you hadn't been in very close contact with Bryn before you heard about the incident. And then it was actually like, I think, 5 years before the trial. So I was wondering if you had kept in contact with Bryn from the time of the incident until the trial, and then how you decided to go and see what part of the trial you saw.
Yeah, so I think she moved back a few months back before, or not moved back. All this happened, and then she was back in Illinois, because
Mhm.
that's where her family's from and everything. So flying back and forth, I believe, for the thing she needed to go to out in California. And I was home at the time, and it was kind of one of those things. I think I had like reached out and just said,
Mhm.
"Hey, like, how are you doing? Are you okay? I'm back in town if you ever want to hang out." And something we had always enjoyed doing together was like camping and hiking. So we would meet up and go like hike in just like the park around here. So we started to kind of reconnect, just from kind of being stuck at home.
Mhm.
We've stayed close, and I've continued to hang out with her as much as I can, whenever she's feeling okay and up to it during these past 5 years. Just because of like the conversations we've had and everything, I wanted to be there for her, and so I was able to come just 2 days that I was off work. Like, we weren't sure about the days. Like, even, I don't know if you guys knew, it got pushed back. So all the dates were changing. And
Mhm.
like, well,
Constantly changing all the time.
so I just picked 2 days that I had off work and I booked a flight. And I was like, well, if it's going on, I'll be there. If it's not, I'll be there, So yeah, so I was able to see the first or the last day of the jury selection and the first day of the trial. But yeah, I just felt like I needed to be there for my friend. And I haven't been out to LA in my adult life, so it's kind of interesting to see LA too, in the middle of November. But yeah, but that's why I decided to come here.
So you saw two pretty important days. You saw the opening statements on the first day of the trial, but you also saw some of the jury selection, which Heidi and I did not see because we were getting a lot of mixed messages about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. I will say, like, one of the biggest things that stood out to me was at one point they almost like eliminated, or they were thinking about eliminating someone because she was a single female with no children, which I thought was really interesting. Just from
Was that the prosecution or the defense that was eliminating?
right, so that it was the prosecution.
So a single woman might be able to identify with Bryn.
Yeah, but it's written in our law that way. Like she had a thing in there, and she cited like a specific thing that says, that being single, or being a female that's single without any children, for some reason that could be a reason for you to be eliminated off a jury, which again, I just thought was a really interesting
Wow.
thing to learn in just 2023. Just because I'm also a single female without children, so is Bryn. So like that is, well, not only a factor in any trial, but especially this one. I thought that was really interesting, but it was interesting to see the process, and during all that, I honestly gained more confidence in our lawyers. Like, I mean, obviously this is what they do, and I know they were working really hard, but it was just kind of interesting, like the questions that they asked and what they were asking about in that. One of the big things was like, would you ever hurt a dog? Oh, like I wouldn't, like, how do they select a jury? It's like, in that, I don't know, that seems like such a simple question, and now it makes sense to ask, but at the time I was like, oh, like I wouldn't have thought to ask that at all, to like pick.
Wow, that is interesting because you're supposed to be judged by your peers, right? So a young single woman with no children would be her peer.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Wow.
The prosecutor is a woman too.
Yeah.
So
I'd be interested in any other interesting jury stories you have.
Well, I mean, I know one of the questions they asked about like marijuana use as well, or if they had experience, and from what I heard, I think most of them even most of the people that had been asked in had a negative experience with marijuana, and I'm not sure if that's something that like they kind of like had asked beforehand and almost like pre sort of selected, but a lot of when he would ask about like the experience with marijuana, a lot of them were negative experiences. So I'm not
Did
sure.
they go into the negative experiences, or was it just a general?
They asked about like seeing things, or paranoia. So some of those like little things, but most of it was them kind of like selling a little story. They used it like once or twice, and they had this negative experience, so they don't use it often anymore because of that. So that
This was brought up during the trial. The prosecutor mentioned, yeah, some of our jurors had, I think it was the prosecutor. Do you remember,
yes,
Christy?
yeah,
It
she
was
said something about that some of the jurors had expressed that they had negative experiences after one use or something like that.
Yeah.
but I can't for sure say. But she definitely did mention it, and then the judge cautioned her and said not to mention it, not to mention anything that the jurors said.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well, it
then,
would seem that if they had negative experiences, they could kind of understand what, had happened to Bryn a little bit more than people that only had positive experiences.
so if they had those negative experiences, or being aware that jurors were chosen who had them, what was your thought when you found out that they put in a guilty verdict?
I mean, I don't know if they knew, like some of the things, like when they showed the picture of the bong, they showed that the first day, and I was like, wow, that's a really big bong, like I was like, wow,
Mhm.
that's really large. And as someone who doesn't use it or hasn't used it often, I don't think would have known that, like, oh wow, and then um there's one other thing that kind of surprised me in the trial was like how much marijuana was in the house, based on the fact that they said that he used it almost every single day, that he did not have a lot of marijuana in that house at all. So maybe like someone who had used it maybe would have like seen those types of things, but if everyone on the jury hadn't ever like used it or used it often, maybe they wouldn't have known some of those things.
Mhm.
So Amy, tell me what that tells you. What does that tell you, and what does the size of the bong tell you?
The size of the bong tells me that, I mean, like I would never use that with a new user, personally. So that's a lot of weed to be inhaling as a new person. Um, and so not being a lot of weed in the house makes me think that there's either somewhere else that he had it. They either used everything that he had or it got taken somewhere else.
Oh.
Ah. So the problem is that we'll never know because they, couldn't test what was actually in the bong because it was, it was all used up. So they couldn't test that. They didn't know if anybody had taken any, but there was no evidence that, or at least doesn't seem to be any evidence that someone took it. They only had what was there, which tested at 4%, way back when. And so it was really difficult to figure out what exactly was there. And that was part of the debate between the prosecution and the defense, that the defense kept in, suggesting that there was other material in the bong, and maybe it was laced with waxes or oils or something. That's what we got from the trial. I think we got a lot, the defense, kind of put a lot of emphasis on that, whereas the prosecution just said, well, it was just plain old ordinary marijuana, and it was that 4% that we found in the house, and we didn't find anything else. So, I don't know why they were debating that so much.
Yeah.
Do you think that makes a difference? That would have made a difference?
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it would make a difference having, marijuana that would have had like a higher potency to it. But even at 4% with the size of that bong, that's a lot of air in that. If that's where they were smoking from. They also had mentioned on that first day that there was a second bong that was missing from the house too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that as well. There's a lot of weird like kind of things with that, that just seem strange in general, which to me is kind of weird, but yeah, they like you said, they said they couldn't test anything that was in the bong itself, so you don't even know what they were smoking, and what was there obviously wasn't smoked. So if that's 5%, the only thing we can solidly say is that that's not what they smoked. But yeah, he could have had something else. And the other thing that that frustrates me is that it in a state that it is legal to buy marijuana, he was buying it illegally from a different source.
Mhm.
And actually, I shouldn't say, I'm not sure if it was legal in 2018. But you
It
know,
was, but
yeah.
they
So
said
why
it was an illegal shop. They
Yeah.
said that some of what he bought, the OG Kush, had a warning label on it only for experienced users or tolerant users. But they couldn't prove that that's what was in the bong that particular time, but they, that was what he was smoking previously or had, bought. But I think what you said about the bong being filled up so much with smoke, the way it was described, um, that is something that both sides could probably agree on. And that may have been enough to, be the trigger.
Yeah, and one of the experts at the end who came in, the guy who is a marijuana advocate and works with medical marijuana patients, he talked about stacking the tube or the mouthpiece with smoke. And Amy, you said there's a lot of air in there, but when you're stacking, the whole point is to remove the air and just make it smoke, 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 smoke. And so yeah, I mean, so even if it was 4.1%, if you get several hits in there, what does that add up to? And a couple of the experts said that the fact that only 4.1% was found in the condo, they said that doesn't mean anything because the good stuff could have already been gone, like Amy said. And I've never heard anybody say, maybe somebody took it away. And that was, thank you for saying that. That was really,
that's
I hadn't even considered it. Yeah. And since there was a bong missing for a while.
then that's the only reason I bring that up, because they mentioned that very briefly that first day, but they didn't really hit on it at any other point in time. And that has kind of been sitting in the back of my mind. It's like, if there was a second bong, why wouldn't it have just been in the house? And why? So, but
And there were two roommates home at the time of the incident.
Yes.
Yes.
And Amy, when you were observing the trial, did they show the video cam of Bryn in psychosis when the police arrived? So you witnessed that, you saw that.
I heard it. I was there with Raz, and we had been told that they might show it. And I did not have any desire to see it. So we had actually brought earplugs. And I put my head down. So I heard some of it, but I don't need to see that. I need to have that in my head, kind of a thing. So yeah, so they showed it, but I didn't.
And not to backtrack, but at what point did you believe it was cannabis, that it was marijuana that caused Bryn to have psychotic behaviors?
I don't think I at any point I've ever believed that Bryn did this in her right state of mind. She's always, in my mind, it's always been like an out of her mind experience. So I wouldn't like define it as psychosis until the trial, but at no point did I ever think that this is something that she was actively doing, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, but I'm just curious your thought process too, because it's quite interesting, because in the beginning, I didn't believe marijuana could cause these types of violent behaviors. Did you do some research on your own, or did you just you read the news articles and it says, yes, it was a cannabis-induced psychosis episode? Or what was the thing that got you to the point where you're like, yeah, this was marijuana induced?
I mean, probably when they changed the trial, or the what am I trying to say?
The charge?
Yeah, when they changed the charges. And because up until then, I'll be honest, I didn't really look into a lot of it. Again, like hanging out with Bryn, this isn't something we ever talked about. And we're, living our life, and we talked in like general terms, but I really didn't know totally what was going on in the trial itself, if that makes sense at all, either. And so when the charges were reduced, and everything started ramping up, and I knew that I was going to go see the trial in person, I kind of like did all my research and looked into everything. Then, but like hearing the experts, and even from some of my own experiences, they with marijuana, like obviously it never got violent, but the idea that it is mind altering, that I can see that happening, so kind of throughout all of this, and in the last couple months of really like looking into things, I can totally 100% believe that.
Were you there when Vinny was interviewed? That was the first day, I think, or was it the second day?
That was the first day.
Yeah, so you were there when Vinny was interviewed about his experience. How did you react to that? Had you heard about that before?
I hadn't. That actually made me really angry, like very angry, because that means that this has happened to Chad before. Like, you've seen someone experience this, and it's now happened again. So that was very frustrating.
We had a common response that, wow, this happened before, and it got very serious as well because he wanted to go to the hospital, and yet just kept, using marijuana and giving it to other people, and without saying anything about it.
Or thinking.
So just for the audience, if somebody's watching this for the first two times, let's just summarize who Vinny is. Vinny is Chad O'Melia's roommate, right? A roommate. He's a roommate, or he's a friend? He's a roommate. And he, a couple weeks prior to Bryn having the experience of cannabis-induced psychosis, Vinny obviously had a psychotic reaction to marijuana in the presence of Chad, and was asking for help, and didn't necessarily receive professional medical help, but was even threatening to run down the street naked if he wasn't getting the help. So he was obviously experiencing psychosis, and
this was his first time of using marijuana.
Oh, it's his first time. Okay.
Yes.
That's interesting too. And so that was about 2 weeks before Bryn experienced cannabis-induced psychosis. So what you guys are saying is Chad had witnessed psychosis from marijuana use prior to the incident with Bryn.
With the same bong.
With the same bong.
Yeah.
In the same environment. It happened in the condo they were all living in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some of his reaction, according to Bryn, was that he was offering her water, something like that, according to the testimony of Bryn. And when Vinny had that reaction, he just told him to go sleep it off, basically. So it just says he just didn't take it seriously.
Yeah.
And then I found on YouTube, I found videos where they encourage this kind of behavior, where a video that was posted in 2016 of an experienced guy, experience with dabs, gets a new user wasted off of one hit of a dab, and the naive user goes psychotic, and they film it, and there's lots of laughs on this. They think it's hilarious. So I feel like this is a part of the culture that needs to be changed. And I think that they are partially responsible for this death, because had Chad not thought that it was just a funny thing to go put this guy in front of South Park and tell her to drink water and, you know, laugh or whatever and disregard either one of them who are having really frightening experiences, he would be alive today. He could be, because he could have acted in his own best interests, but he didn't know what his best interests were, because the environment of legal marijuana is you can't use too much, you can't overdose. It's funny if somebody has a bad trip. It's not serious, and I take serious issue with that.
So Amy, what would you say to the listeners today if they are using marijuana with their friends or just for the first time and they are experiencing symptoms of psychosis, which could be paranoia, hallucinations, or delusions? What is your message to those people that might be experiencing that? What should they do?
I mean, I would kind of, like you pointed out, like Chad saw it happen before. And so it's like, knowing that that can happen as the experienced user, I think you need to be careful, and you need to make sure that you're helping them along on this, if this is what, you know, they're choosing, you are choosing to do together. But kind of like Heidi, you mentioned it briefly, like of the laughing, like don't laugh at someone, take them seriously. And even though like, and even like, maybe you know that, okay, so they may not be having like a medical issue, but like in their head it's real. So don't disregard it, like take it seriously and help them out. And kind of like you said with the industry of just like laughing at someone, like you shared that video with me and I have never seen anything like that before. And I can't imagine ever doing that to someone. You know, like if you think of even like alcohol, like if you go to college and you're like, oh yeah, I just gave this kid 10 drinks and left him in a room by himself, like people would be like, what are you thinking? You know? So take it seriously, because as we can see, and you know, it's not always just okay, sit in front of the TV and you're fine. You know, this is a drug. And also I want to mention, like you mentioned, trip. I'll be honest, until the trial, I never really thought of like using cannabis as a trip. You know, like that, like, you know, that's like an, you know, acid or LSD, you know, those are the hard drugs.
Yeah.
And it was actually something I mentioned to my mom, and my mom was like, no, you always go on a trip with marijuana. So like the difference in generations too, I think is very, very noticeable, you know, and with the media saying that this is okay and you can't overdose and all you're going to do is sit on your couch and just be relaxed. It's like, no, that's not the case. And we haven't studied this, and we don't know that.
Yeah, that's a
Or
good
we do
point.
know it, and then the people who talk about it are ridiculed and attacked, and the media doesn't report on it because they don't want to be attacked or canceled. So it's a problem.
Have you talked to Bryn since the trial's been over?
No,
Have you been in contact with her?
no.
What was your thought process when you heard Bryn was deemed guilty of involuntary manslaughter?
I couldn't believe it. Especially like I was only there for the first day, you know, but it just seemed like I was so impressed with her lawyers. It was like, okay, like this makes sense. This, you know, they've got this in the bag. But in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, like, I have a bias. Obviously, I knew Bryn before this happened. I've known her for years. You know, so to me, it's very obvious. So it was kind of shocking, and it's just frustrating, because, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. I was really hoping that, you know, this would be just the end of it, you know, with a not guilty verdict, and then everything can move on. But I think even if that had happened, you know, there would still be more things to deal with.
Have you put yourself in like Chad's parents' shoes and kind of thought about what are they thinking? How are they feeling?
Yes. And I remember hearing a trial, it's a tragedy all around. It's just a huge tragedy on both ends. And as Heidi mentioned, it's just like, can we, is the media to blame for this? Could Chad have made a different decision and we would have both of them here, or made a different decision and then we're not in this spot at all. So yes, and that it's a really hard thing because it is still a life, and it is, I can't imagine that at all.
I think what's, to me, at the first day, the prosecutor said that it's like that she's, she was psychotic at the time, but what she was charged with is voluntary intoxication. So she voluntarily used the marijuana, so she is responsible for whatever happened to her while she was under the influence of marijuana. But we see in our culture that many people don't have any clue that marijuana could create that kind of a psychosis. So, how do you feel about that? That she's being held responsible, even though there's really, not much awareness of what could happen with this marijuana inducing these kind of strange mental states and sometimes leading to violence.
I think that I hope that this will shed some light on that for people, because yeah, if anyone had taken, Vinny seriously at the time, kind of a thing, but they say, voluntary intoxication, but as Heidi kind of said about the stacking and how big that bong was, and I think as I said, where as a non user, you may not know that that's an extra large bong. You may think that that's just, oh, that's normally what you smoke out of. And even me, ever since this happened, I think twice about anything anyone gives me, because at any point you never know what could be in there or part of it.
Yeah, we hear a lot about date rape drugs and, men going out with women and giving them this or that, but you don't hear about marijuana leading to some kind of a, breakdown like that.
And I think it's not reported, or it's not talked about as much, or it's thought that, okay, yeah, I took the hit from that bong, so it's on me, kind of like this is, but how do you know, how much percentage is in there? And especially with Bryn, she wouldn't have known that this could have happened. No one was informed of this, especially in 2018.
Yes, especially in 2018.
And the bud tenders will talk about their patients, my patient,
because it's
like
medical.
they're medically trained to give advice.
It's bizarre that they allow them to impersonate medical professionals. I worked in the medical field for 20 years, and I am a licensed physical therapist assistant. And it was drilled in my head, I don't ever call myself an actual physical therapist. I have to refer to myself as a physical therapist assistant, because I will misrepresent myself, and I'm considered a paraprofessional, not a professional. And we learned that day one. And if you were caught misrepresenting yourself, you were reprimanded. It's very strict that you adhere, and I had to adhere by the rules of what my license allowed me to do. And of course, it's different per state. I've been licensed in Texas and Colorado, but I've only practiced in Colorado. And literally the therapists that I worked under their license. And if I made a mistake, they are held accountable for my mistake. If I did something that was unethical or I harmed a patient with the wrong procedure or technique I was using with them. And so it's just quite interesting that these states are very loose on allowing people to misrepresent who they truly are and how they are educated for the mighty dollar, right? For the profit. Amy, you also mentioned, you said, and I really first of all, I really appreciate you being here having this conversation. I can't imagine how painful this is for you, knowing and caring for Bryn for all these years, and knowing what happened to Chad that evening, and just processing all the dynamics with this trial. And you mentioned that you hope that this raises awareness and that people understand that this is a risk for somebody who's using marijuana, especially a new user, and how you guys described the bong was stacked. I just want to mention, because it's with my experience, and maybe Christy and Heidi would agree with me. When we go forward and we provide this type of information, we are severely attacked, and not people don't receive the information very well. And I was just in Ohio, and I was testifying in front of a Senate committee, and I told the senators, I said, I told them about Bryn Spejcher and what had happened and the results of that. And there's a lady right behind me getting so angry at me describing this, and they have it all on camera. And right when I was done testifying, my friend that I was with that was testifying with me too, she's like, "Oh, we need to leave. We need to leave. Another senator wants to talk to us." And I'm so glad she pulled me out of the chambers at that time, because most of the people in that chamber were marijuana industry people, lawyers that were interested in profiting off the industry. And it was a very contentious, unsafe environment for me to just kind of hang out in for a while. So I was glad I kind of removed myself after I testified. I don't know, but I mean, especially from your perspective, which you knew that marijuana couldn't cause this, and I'm sorry I'm a little long-winded with this. Is there any advice you have for us when we are going forward and continuing this type of work? What do you think is going to break the ice, I guess, is what it is, where this information is more received and accepted by the general population?
Not really sure, because I was like, oh wow, this is, interesting, but obviously had this experience personally. I think some of it is coming from a place of knowledge, or like knowledge and sharing, like not necessarily like, hey, this is bad for everyone or bad all the time, but like look at these experiences and look what can happen. Like, even until this trial, like I never thought of psychosis as something that could be a side effect. But it's definitely like it's baffling to me that these people in the industry like don't see it. I've had personal experiences where either friends have had, not obviously not this extreme, but similar situations where they've had like very high reactions to something, and you're like, okay, that wasn't that big of a deal. But I also was in the medical field. I was an athletic trainer, so very similar. We never diagnosed anything, we only evaluated. And so maybe coming from that aspect, where anyone who was in my presence who was having an issue, like my brain kicks into, how can I help them? So I would take those things seriously. So in my mind, when this all came up, and, hearing what you guys had to say, I'm like, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So if these people don't see it, it's almost like a willful ignorance. And I don't know how you get past that.
Yeah, I wonder, have you shared with somebody that this happened and you've had, like, they don't believe you? Have you had that experience?
Um, not specifically, but in general, going around telling everyone, about everything, but like, oh hey, like I've had people had bad reactions or like and they don't know and they don't know what they're feeling sometimes. And and again, going through this trial, like I'm going to refer to marijuana as a mind altering drug from now on. Like, yes, this is a mind altering drug. Like I want to make sure that this is a mind altering drug. Because it just is like, oh hey, like, oh, you're just chill is a mind like you're altering your mind.
No, if a user gets paranoid, that means stop immediately, because that means a person's brain is negative. I mean, is vulnerable to the negative mental health effects of marijuana, and continued use could cause psychosis, could also lead to schizophrenia. And if you think about paranoia, paranoia is when a person believes something is happening when it isn't. And so that easily translates into a loss of touch with reality and long-term schizophrenia. It's known as the front door to schizophrenia. And so for them not to tell their customers is just, it's reckless. They're the reckless ones here because they have allowed their customers to be tricked into thinking that it's okay to use marijuana at whatever potency, at whatever amount, anytime, and that there are no negative effects. And like Aubrey described, that woman, I don't know who she was, but she sat behind her just going,
Oh, and she pointed her finger at me. She was scolding me. They were very angry at me. I'm not saying that they would have done anything, but it just wasn't a situation I needed to stay in.
no. And it's just amazing. Okay, so you've never experienced that, but does that mean that nobody else has experienced it? I mean, to take that position, they're harming their own friends, they're harming their own people. Because if you go around saying, yeah, it's fine for everybody, and I'm denying there's any harms, like 10% of your friends, that's what the data shows, will be harmed if they use it regularly. So I don't understand that mentality. Don't they want to keep their friends? Don't they want to keep their customers?
Yeah.
Well, I think their mentality is they want it legalized as in many states and at the federal level as soon as possible. And they think that any discussion of any harms means that they're less likely to have it legalized. So it's like, just be quiet until it's legalized. We don't want anything to, stop this, push toward legalization. That's one of their main interests, or if not their main interest.
Yeah, I actually read an article recently, not about marijuana specifically, but about like almost like the people that we look up to. And it's like once you decide that a person is net good, then nothing that they do is in like your mind kind of, or like in society's mind, like harmful. So this was specifically about Elon Musk, where it's like, okay, like what he is bringing to the world and all of his advancements is net good, but do we see kind of like the trail of destruction he's leaving behind in certain ways? But we've decided that it's net good to have him, do all of these things. So then I feel like maybe that's some of that with these people. If they've decided that marijuana needs to be a good thing and for it to be legalized, and in some cases maybe it is, but they don't see that although it could be good for some people, it might be bad for others, and there still are bad things about it.
And also, like, they've taken the natural old school marijuana plant and they've industrialized it to these really toxic, dangerous products. And it's like, why are you doing that? And part of the testimony I said, the flavoring in the vapes, if it wasn't there, I don't think people would be consuming it. They'd spit it out because it tastes so foul. And they've purposely had to put the sugary flavors in some of their products to get the consumers to use it. It's a deception, and it's just bizarre that they have really made it more life-threatening, more toxic than ever before. I really like that. I think that's a good public service announcement campaign, Heidi. You said something about the paranoia. If you experience paranoia, that means stop.
That means stop. stay away because something bad could happen to you. And by the way, it didn't happen to Bryn. She had no warning that
Yeah.
her brain could be negatively affected. She had no way of knowing. It just
Yeah,
came.
and to all the viewers that are listening, that Just Say No campaign, all the stigmatizing around that, it's okay to say no. You can be the person to protect your brain, to protect your health, and say no and walk away and seek the help you need to seek. If you are having any of these symptoms, cannabis-induced psychosis doesn't always lead in violent behaviors. Cannabis-induced psychosis can be kind of mild, and it could be like a severe break like Bryn experienced that night. But it's okay if you're feeling paranoid, if you're having a hard time, to ask for help. And you don't need to be shamed by the industry or anybody else around you. It doesn't mean there's something drastically wrong with you or you have a weak brain. It means that it's okay to ask for help and you can recover from this. So have that conversation.
I want to make a comment / question. It sounds like you and Bryn rekindled your friendship after the killing in 2018, and you guys bonded over traumatic experiences and getting through life together. Did you ever feel like you might have been in danger by hanging around her?
No, never, not at any point.
That says a lot.
Mhm.
Was Bryn ever violent? Did she ever have any violent behaviors when you guys were growing up?
No.
We're asking these questions because on the comments of, some of the material that's been put out in the newspapers and on blogs and podcasts and, TV shows and things, the people cannot believe that the marijuana caused Bryn to behave that way. And it must be something else about her mental illness, or if it is the marijuana, it was laced with some other horrible substance. It wasn't THC, which the lab tests confirmed that it was just THC. And the experts, did say that marijuana-induced psychosis is in the DSM, the manual for psychologists. It's well known to them. They had many cases of it, but people still, knowing or even hearing about this, simply do not believe. They are simply in denial that this could cause Bryn to behave that way. And then after she behaved that way and she came out of it and she didn't have marijuana anymore, she was herself, which was a nonviolent person, a very normal person, a person who's a high achiever, a wonderful, caring person. And she never would have done anything like that to Chad if she hadn't had that psychotic break from the marijuana.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I have to believe it was just marijuana because that's what those tests say. And like I said, I do have a bias, and I've known Bryn for long enough where, like I said, at no point did I ever think she would do this outside of that situation.
Yeah.
Well, you do know her, and that's what the other people, they didn't know her at all, but they thought that they thought that they knew better than any of the experts or any person that knew her like you. They think that they know better, and that's what's really frustrating and makes me angry.
Mm-hmm. And one of the experts, Dr. William Wershing, talked about how he had definitely seen people in marijuana-induced psychosis who were just doing horrible things to themselves. They said that it can be self-directed and other-directed, and he's seen people in marijuana-induced psychosis try to gouge out their own eyes, cut off their genitalia. It goes on, so it's gruesome. It can be gruesome, and it needs to be a public service announcement that people understand, because you don't want them thinking, oh, it's laced with something when it could be THC.
It's THC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have just one more final question. I know we've been on for over an hour, and Christy and Heidi, maybe you have another question too, but my question to Amy is, Amy, when you see some of these violent acts of these mass shootings or just the uptick of violence in our country, do you question it now and think, I wonder if that was a marijuana-induced psychotics episode.
I will now. You said that because you do kind of see that a lot of times coming from after they happen, there sometimes is that mental health aspect into it, and if you're trying to fix that with something that's not working, or something you thought would work and is not working, yeah, I could imagine that.
And unruly airline passengers. That's one of our things. We're like, is anybody? And they say no alcohol, can't drink before you get on an airplane because those unruly airline passengers. And we're like, what about marijuana? Is anybody asking why they're psychotic?
Yeah, the industry markets take an edible before you board a plane, and that's the most dangerous thing anybody can ever do, because you don't know how just that one edible, you'll react to that one edible.
Richard Kirk that, shot his wife had the edible, and that's what, triggered him. So an edible can trigger, as well as the bong and other aspects of other types of use of marijuana can trigger it. So it's not safe to just, do something that could put you in with other people that could lead to something untoward that you wouldn't imagine.
Yeah, and there are billboards by Los Angeles airport that say, last opportunity before you get to the airport to buy your weed right here. Hop on in. It's like, that's so irresponsible.
They have them at the Illinois-Wisconsin border, right at the first exit. There's a dispensary. So last exit before Wisconsin, to get over there. You have like all the signs to say last dispensary, which is even worse.
Okay, any last final thoughts? Amy, is there something you want the public to know or understand that we didn't cover?
I don't think so.
I think your perspective is so important in this issue. And I think us having this conversation about, you didn't realize that cannabis-induced psychosis was a thing, and now you do, will help us raise awareness, because Christy and Heidi and we've been talking about this for years, and they're like, oh boy, here they come again, and when we get a voice and a willingness like you, somebody like you, it does help us raise that awareness. So thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you, Amy.
Yeah, thank you guys. Like I said, even from the start, but even a lot of knowledge. Even I'm going through all your videos online too, and this is probably the most useful source for all of that stuff. So
you mean for the trial or for cannabis-induced psychosis?
For both, because you have a bunch of videos out there. Even some about the kids and things that you have had at your house and stuff. So
the kids that I hosted in my home. Yeah. That's great. I'm so glad you're watching them. I do notice that the channel is gaining more viewers and subscribers, and not just, I'm like, oh, if we could just get this going more and more. Slowly but surely, we're raising awareness.
Thank you, Aubrey. Thanks for all your work. You are the rock.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's a team effort. We all come at this. I think we make a great team. So thank you.
It's a lot easier when it's a team, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
We give a big thank you to Amy for joining us today and sharing her perspective on cannabis-induced psychosis in the Bryn Spejcher trial. We thank Heidi Anderson Swan and Dr. Christy Brown for being national advocates, raising awareness about the harms of marijuana, especially cannabis-induced psychosis. Every Brain Matters is a community developed by families who have been harmed by today's industrialized marijuana. Please consider giving us a donation at everybrainmatters.org. The donation button's at the top of the page. If you have a story to share, please contact us at info@everybrainmatters.org. Please visit us at everybrainmatters.org.